Let us pray. Our Father, keep us mindful of the special and unique opportunity we have to work for our constituents and our province. And in that work, give us both strength and wisdom. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions.
The member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to give notice that it is my intention that after question period to rise under Standing Order number 30 and make a motion for an emergency debate on the funding of post-secondary education for Alberta's native populations. I believe you have been supplied with a notice.
Introduction of bills.
Yes, member for Lacombe.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill number PR1, Canadian Union College Amendment Act 1989. Mr. Speaker, this bill will make an amendment to the college's power to pay annuities and provide for such arrangements that are not treated as life insurance.
The honourable member for Lacombe has moved first reading to Bill PR1, Canadian Union College Amendment Act 1989. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Bill number PR1, Canadian Union College Amendment Act 1989, introduced by the honourable member Mr. Moore, is now read a first time.
The member for Edmonton Highlands, followed by Banff Cochrane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the member for Edmonton Strathcona, I beg leave to introduce Bill PR9, the bill being Claudia Elizabeth Becker Adoption Act.
The honourable member for Edmonton Highlands, on behalf of the member for Edmonton Strathcona, has moved first reading of Bill PR9, Claudia Elizabeth Becker Adoption Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number PR9, Claudia Elizabeth Becker Adoption Act, introduced by the honourable member Ms. Barrett, is now read a first time.
Banff Cochrane, followed by Calgary McKnight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request leave to introduce a bill being the Canada Olympic Park Property Tax Exemption Act 1989. Mr. Speaker, this is a bill which will extend the current exemption of various facilities at Canada Olympic Park to include the Olympic Hall of Fame. The taxing authority of the municipal district of Rocky View has consented to the exemption for as long as the property is owned and operated by the Calgary Olympic Development Association.
The honourable member for Banff Cochrane has moved first reading to Bill PR3, Canada Olympic Park Property Tax Exemption Amendment Act 1989. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number PR3, Canada Olympic Park Property Tax Exemption Amendment Act 1989, introduced by the honourable member Mr. Evans, is now read a first time.
Calgary McKnight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request leave to introduce Bill PR8, the Om Prakash Panjwani Adoption Act. This bill provides for the adoption of an adult nephew by his uncle, in whose guardianship he has been for 8 years.
The honourable member for Calgary McKnight has moved first reading to Bill PR8, Om Prakash Panjwani Adoption Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number PR8, Om Prakash Panjwani Adoption Act, introduced by the honourable member Mrs. Gagnon, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to file with the Assembly 4 copies of the annual report on the inspection of animals under the Universities Act for the fiscal year ended March 31, 1988, and the Northern Alberta Children's Hospital financial statements for the year ended March 31, 1989. No, I do.
I am pleased to table pursuant to statute the annual report of the Office of the Ombudsman.
Introduction of special guests.
And for Stony Plain, followed by Drayton Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Assembly 22 students from Stony Plain Elementary School. They're accompanied by a parent, Mrs. Eileen Barber, and teachers, Mrs. Deborah Butler, Ms. Roberta Milner, Mr. Wayne Turner. I would ask them to rise and receive the special welcome of this House.
Member for Drayton Valley.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly 16 students from the Lyndale School. They're seated in the members' gallery. They're accompanied today by their teacher, Eileen Harris, and by two parents, Carol Fortin and Cheryl Hall. And I would ask that they rise and receive the traditional welcome of this House.
Member for Calgary Foothills.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce to you and to the members of the Assembly some special guests that are visiting Canada. They're from New Delhi. They're seated in the public gallery, and I'd like to ask them to stand once I've read off their names. It's Mr. Shaman Lal. He's a member, an employee of the Mineral Trading Corporation of India. He's accompanied by his wife, Mrs. Raj Lal, and their son, Mr. Sudhir Lal. I'd also like to introduce members of the multicultural community, the immediate past president of the India-Canada Association from my riding, Mr. Lal Narang. He's accompanied by his wife, Mrs. Nirmal Narang, and their daughter, Ritu Narang. I'd like the Assembly to extend to them the usual welcome.
Member for Athabasca Lac-La-Biche.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce to you and through you to the Assembly 68 students from the beautiful town of Athabasca, even more beautiful than Fort McMurray and Bonnyville. The students are seated at the members in the public gallery, and they're accompanied by their teachers, Mr. Larry Armfelt, Mrs. Lucy Berry, Mrs. Dorothy Ryan, and Mr. Paul Ponitz, and also their bus drivers, Mrs. Erna Wilson and Mr. Ray Jodery. I'd like them to rise and get the traditional welcome from this House. Thank you.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, yesterday in this Assembly, the Minister of Education told us that he would not consider rescinding his department's poorly timed and fiscally irresponsible mill rate hike. Mr. Speaker, clearly this government cannot be trusted to provide even the most simple financial guidance or leadership in this province. Mr. Speaker, yesterday also the Minister said he was not aware of any municipalities that would be late in making requisition payments. Mr. Speaker, I have here now a motion passed last night by the Calgary City Council, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, "Therefore be it resolved that the City of Calgary convey its strong objection to the provincial government for the late receipt of the School Foundation Program Fund requisition, and the City of Calgary advise the provincial government that it will pay this requisition at the next available tax billing period, June 30th, 1990. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister, will the Minister give assurances to this Assembly that Calgary will not be penalized in any extra funds because of the irresponsibility of this provincial government?
Mr. Speaker, I have not received official notification of that motion by Calgary City Council, but of course I read the same media reports as the honourable member did, and I would want to discuss that with the mayor and representatives of the Calgary City Council. But in our view, Mr. Speaker, it is our view that we will be asking municipalities to contribute the revenue from that mill rate into the School Foundation Program Fund so that we may be able to continue to fund education as strongly and generously as we are able to in this province.
Minister misses the point. It's because they sent out these requisitions too late, Mr. Speaker, and I want to come back and say to this minister, how can he justify charging the City of Calgary and other municipalities this extra money when they have no chance of recovering it, Mr. Speaker? How can you justify it?
That's right. Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've said in this Assembly before and said publicly, I regret, on behalf of my colleagues, I regret that we were not able to inform the municipalities as early as we would have liked. And as early as we customarily do. But Mr. Speaker, I'd suggest that the honourable member go back to the law, which all of us in this Assembly have sworn an oath to uphold, and the law spells out that annually the Minister of Education and the provincial government will decide and determine what the mill rate will be, and will then so advise municipalities. By the time that municipalities had used last year's rate rather than this year's rate, they had not been informed of the setting of any mill rate. So as I said, we regret the late notice, but in fact, municipalities had not been informed at all as to what the mill rate was going to be for 1989.
Mr. Speaker, the point is this government did not get their act together. They had to go on something, Mr. Speaker. And my question is, in view of the situation and the problems it's creating right across the province, in view of the fact that Calgary's told you they're not going to pay it till next year, will the minister do the correct thing and withdraw it and bring it back in next year?
No, Mr. Speaker, we will still be asking municipalities to contribute that increment to the School Foundation Program Fund, as I have said, so that the province will be able to continue to fund education as its #1 priority in this government for all Albertans and for the betterment of all of our young kids.
Thank you. Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct a second question to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Health's story about the power she is seeking in Bill 5 seems to change from time to time. First, it had nothing to do with privatization, Mr. Speaker. Then she needed the powers to transfer 3 facilities to local boards, just to local boards. Then the third version came up the other day, Mr. Speaker. There's actually 4 facilities now, and she may privatize some of them, Mr. Speaker. But regardless of this, we have shown, Mr. Speaker, the official opposition that she can do A, B, C, or D, or all of the above, Mr. Speaker, with the previous power she had under the previous acts, Mr. Speaker. My question to this minister, will the minister admit today that the language of the 2 previous acts gives her all the powers she needs to deal with these 4 facilities?
Speaker, we're not dealing with the 2 previous acts. We are dealing with an act, or a bill rather, that's before this Assembly. And I would be happy to supplement the answers I gave in this House on the 16th and 19th of June when the bill comes up for second reading and Committee of the Whole study.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, as we've learned in the past, it's often too late, Mr. Speaker.
That's right.
And what I'm saying today, then, if the minister's looking at some changes, will she come clean with Albertans and withdraw this bill then and go back to work today and bring back a bill that satisfies the narrow powers she said she needs?
Right on. Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition is asking for me to tell him what I want to discuss during second reading or Committee of the Whole. And I believe the more appropriate time to deal with the issue is at those times, and I have already indicated to this House that I will be doing that.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, people do not trust this government. That's right. We had to fight back one other Medicare bill. If she's not prepared to withdraw the bill, then will she at least table some amendments, Mr. Speaker, here in the House today so we have time to look at them, so the people of Alberta have time to look at them before this bill becomes law.
Amendments obviously don't occur before we get to the next stage of the bill. Minister? No. All right. Paying question, Leader of the Liberal Party. Point of order is taken. Thank you. Leader of the Liberal Party.
I'd like to defer to the honourable member from Gold Bar.
Mr. Speaker, recently in a provincial court, the remarks made by one judge have proven to Albertans, and particularly to women of the province, that we've been fooled. We've been fooled because we thought that as a caring and a civilized society we had made gains and developed a significant understanding that family violence under any circumstance can't be condoned. But we hear of cases where, following a severe assault on a woman, the police failed to lay charges, and a judge blames women when they are beaten. When remarks like this are made, Mr. Speaker, by one as high in public stature, it simply reinforces all of the archaic attitudes that thinking Albertans have been fighting hard to stop. My question is to the Deputy Premier, Mr. Speaker. Will the Deputy Premier now speak out regarding this situation and make a clear and unequivocal public statement that such comments are improper, unfair, and totally unacceptable?
Mr. Speaker, there's nothing in the preamble to the member's question which the government would object to. And as a matter of fact, this question was raised during our caucus discussion just today by some of our members, and the Minister of Labour is prepared to answer that question, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is the clear position of this government that family violence is a criminal action. It is not condoned, whether it's in private or in public. We do not condone any activities that promote it, and I will be as clear upon that as the member opposite wishes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's reassuring. Then to the Deputy Premier or the Minister of Labour, will the government refer the Wetaskiwin case to the province's Judicial Council for their advice on how to educate and sensitize Alberta judges so that this tendency to blame the victim in assault cases will end forever?
Mr. Speaker, I've already given instructions to the Deputy Attorney General to order a transcript of that particular case. That will then be reviewed. If the facts are established, and I expect that they will be, and it is appropriate to do so, the matter will be referred to the Chief Judge of the Provincial Court, and it would be his position then to refer the matter to the Judicial Council, which is the body that is a disciplinary body for all our provincial court judges.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, the next question I expect is to the Solicitor General. This government, Mr. Speaker, is on record regarding their supposed determination to take steps to curb family violence. Will the Minister now act on this by immediately convening a meeting of all police chiefs in the province to reiterate and ensure that this commitment is followed through at the enforcement level?
Hear, hear. Mr. Speaker, all police chiefs in this province are aware that it is their duty to instruct their police officers to prosecute and investigate and charge wherever there is grounds to believe an offense of being committed under any criminal code. It is my understanding and my knowledge that in all departments that this is in fact being done. There are still the remaining difficulties, though, have occurred in the past in assault charges, and that's what we're speaking to on this series of questions, that in the past many of assault charges were in fact laid, but there was no one to prosecute, no one to come forward with the evidence which was necessary for convictions, which was always a tremendous frustration to the police, to the prosecutors, and to the whole of the Attorney General's Department. and they are again aware that they are supposed to prosecute these and will continue to do so, I am certain.
The chair hesitates to interrupt, but we'll be reviewing the blues with regard to the lead-off question because of Beauchesne 411 subsection 5. Some further limitations seem to be generally understood. A question may not reflect on the character or conduct of certain categories and members of the judiciary, and that is also picked up with Beauchesne 493 subsection 1. Chair recognizes the member for Redwater Andrew, followed by Edmonton Avonmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question today, Mr. Speaker, is to the Minister of Environment. I am advised that due to the heavy rains overnight, the city of Edmonton has turned on some emergency pumps that pump raw sewage into the North Saskatchewan River, which, Mr. Speaker, flows right through the middle of the clean Redwater Andrew constituency. Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister is, how has this situation come about where the city must pump raw sewage into the North Saskatchewan River?
Gross. Well, Mr. Speaker, as members are perhaps aware, basement flooding with raw sewage has been experienced by not only the residents in Millwood, and that sewage goes into the North Saskatchewan River, but also in the area of Glengarry, and that raw sewage goes into a couple of lakes just northwest of the city, and it has occurred, I believe, Mr. Speaker, due to some rather poor basic capital works undertaken in the last few years, and I regret that it's necessary to authorize emergency pumping. Otherwise, the sewage would back up into the basements, and some serious health problems could occur.
Mr. Speaker, my supplementary question to the minister is, as you all know, my constituents are used to clean water. Does this pose a serious threat to the users downstream?
Well, according to the department, the effluent is somewhat diluted by the time it reaches the river, but it's not a good situation, Mr. Speaker, and it could become very, very serious indeed if in fact we had sustained rain.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. And we see that the opposition is worried about the pulp mills at Athabasca, but I think we got some more serious problems here. Mr. Speaker, to the minister, what is the long-term solution to this problem?
Very, very simply, Mr. Speaker, the long-term solution is to put in a proper sewerage system, and I've had discussions with His Worship Mayor Kavanagh relative to a program that will put in place a system to protect the water quality in the North Saskatchewan River. And I might add, Mr. Speaker, as I said last night, that during estimates that while the honourable member for Glengarry called me a PR huckster the other day, I would rather be a PR huckster than a former mayor who couldn't seem to put a sewerage system in place.
Edmonton Avonmore, followed by Edmonton
Speaker, to the minister responsible for women's issues.
Recognized Edmonton Avonmore, I'm sorry. The chair was attempting to do so, but was feeling somewhat flushed by some of the remarks. Edmonton Avonmore, followed by Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you. To the minister responsible for women's issues, Mr. Speaker, in 1984, the Alberta Interdepartmental Committee on Wife Battering made recommendations to the Attorney General to formally emphasize the criminal nature of wife assault and to communicate that position to police forces, Crown prosecutors, and judges. Other bodies such as the Alberta Development Council, the Alberta Advisory Council on Women's Issues, and the Department of Social Services have echoed these recommendations, including charging of offenders by police. To the Minister, given that the Solicitor General and the Attorney General seem to be backing away from those recommendations, as evidenced by their action in the High River case, the recommendations made by their predecessors, will the Minister, who represents all women in Alberta, act to remedy this situation?
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite is unfortunately under a misapprehension. The ministers that she has mentioned, in fact, have not backed away from the instructions given to the prosecutors and to the police through their police chiefs. And of course, we don't run the judiciary. We have received those recommendations in 1984, and that is true. Those recommendations came from women's ministers who led the way on this issue, and we've made a lot of progress in the last 5 years. We have given instructions to police officers to lay the charges. We have given instructions to prosecutors to be particularly sensitive in this very, very delicate area. We have had discussions with chief judges over the years, and they have in turn had discussions with their colleagues. One of the recommendations, for example, was to have a conference on this issue, family violence, including the judiciary. This government did support that 3 years ago. We did participate in it, and the judges, as a result, have been far more aware of the issue as well. There have been a lot of things that have gone on in this province. We are regarded across Canada as one of the leaders in our attempts to help victims in family violence. As I said again, and I'll say it again, we do not condone family violence. It is a criminal action, whether it is done in private or in public. Well done.
Mr. Speaker, we all appreciate the recommendations and the directives, but what is the minister responsible for women's issues doing to ensure that these recommendations and these policies are being carried through? Because we certainly hear from women who are not having that experience.
Mr. Speaker, I would be more than happy if the women would come to either myself, the Attorney General, or the Solicitor General and bring specifics of those cases. We would investigate them and follow them up, because once again, I say, it takes many different approaches before family violence will be stamped out. One of the ways it will be discouraged, we believe, is through the criminal courts and the proper processes in those courts. It has to be handled sensitively but firmly. If any of these women who have allegedly received treatment that they do not agree with, would they please come forward and let us look into those cases.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for her answer. I would, however, refer her to study family violence in northern Alberta, where the very recommendation is that the police are not responding appropriately in all cases. And I would therefore again ask her to commit herself to monitoring the action of all police forces and all cross prosecutors throughout this province.
Mr. Speaker, again, I commend the member for her continued concern in this area. It is one we all share. And in northern Alberta, I do know that there are still ongoing concerns with family violence. It's one of the reasons that we, in this budget, have committed more funds in order to create 6 satellite homes, as well as a shelter in Peace River to help the victims. Also, we've announced a community-based program that will fan across Alberta. We will be funding that, but it will be a community-based program to help in the fight against family violence. Particularly in the northern area, I would imagine that those community-based networks, when they are set up, and properly funded will be very helpful in pursuing the points that the member has raised.
Member for Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The provincial treasurer is quickly getting a reputation as the Harry Houdini of Canadian legislatures, with a bag full of accounting tricks which serve to hide and obscure the true financial position of the province. The 1989-90 budget deficit is understated by $306 million because this amount has been funneled through the capital fund created in 1986. Now, if this amount were included in the deficit, and the Heritage Fund expenditures and Crown land sales properly accounted for, the deficit would be $2.2 billion instead of $1.5 billion as reported by the Treasurer. I'm wondering whether the Minister is prepared to confirm that this use of the capital fund indeed has the effect of reducing the budget deficit by about $306 million over what it would have been had the accounting practices of 1985-86 and prior years been followed.
Speaker, I don't know where the member's been for the last 3 years. This is the consistent approach that we followed since 1986, as the member points out, and it has been understood by this legislature since 1986 when the member was elected.
Well, the practice certainly has the convenient effect of reducing the budget deficit, and I was in it since I've been unable to find another Canadian province which follows this particular practice. I wonder whether the Minister is able to tell us what other provinces feel that this is a proper way of accounting for capital expenditures rather than including them in the budget deficit.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it sounds like the member from Westlock is at it again. Mr. Speaker, let me make it very clear that there is no attempt here to hide anything at all, but what is here is a very sound principle that anybody in the private sector would understand. That is, Mr. Speaker, if you buy an asset, such as a school, such as a hospital, such as a university, such as a dam, for example, Mr. Speaker, it's well understood by the people of Alberta that that asset has a life longer than 1 year. And all we have done here, Mr. Speaker, is to ensure that we can record the life of that asset over an extended period of time. And in doing that, Mr. Speaker, what we have done is simply make a provision annually in those departments, the cost of that asset based on the servicing of the debt, and that's properly disclosed in the financial statements of this province, Mr. Speaker, on a budget basis, and that's clearly and consistently reflects the accounting principles that CAs and others have put forward, and other provinces, as a matter of fact, have used that approach, Mr. Speaker. It's a sound approach, Mr. Speaker. It's consistent with accounting principles. It's consistent with the real world that the member from Buffalo seldom understands, and does give a good picture as to how the life of that asset will be reflected in the use of that asset on an annual basis, Mr. Speaker. It's an appropriate process. It's been done since 1986. And when the accounts are all consolidated, Mr. Speaker, of course it comes together, and the bottom line is fully shown.
Sure, I understand, Mr. Speaker. Everyone else is wrong. Will the Minister confirm that the statement at page 20 of his budget address that the annual growth in program expenditure in this province has only been 1.3% since 1985-86 is in fact wrong, Mr. Speaker, because the 1985-86 figures include all capital expenditures and current expenditures?
Thank you, honourable member. The question's been asked.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad the member raised that point because we're very proud of our expenditure record here in the province of Alberta. Despite the wrong-headed approach taken by the opposition party, particularly the Liberal opposition party, we have a record that we're proud of, Mr. Speaker, a record which speaks to our expenditure control, which speaks to our fiscal responsibility, which outlines a plan for us to deal with the deficit, Mr. Speaker, and we're the government that will do it. We're the party that can do it, and we're on course, Mr. Speaker. We're going to commit it to that balanced budget.
Member for Highwood, followed by Edmonton Centre, then Calgary McKnight.
Mr. Speaker, during the recent election, many homeowners in this province were led to believe that they might receive financial relief from high mortgage interest rates. To date, they have received nothing and may only take comfort from the admonition that verily they looketh for help and it cometh not. Will the Minister of Municipal Affairs assure this House that these people will not be betrayed by this government?
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the frustration of the honourable member and appreciate that
he becomes my critic, and I'm sure he's representing some of his constituents that haven't received that mortgage interest rebate to this point in time. For the honourable member, and I apologize for not making a public statement on it prior to this, but I want to give a standard government answer.
Way to go, Ray. Which is an honest answer. Right.
Which is honest. To the honourable member, the checks are in the mail.
My final supplementary would be to inquire whether or not we'll respect him in the morning. Anyway, to the Minister of Municipal Affairs, if it is in fact the case, will the checks that are going out in the near future, will they reflect interest from the 1st of June, the 26th of June, or just what date will they pick up the interest from?
Mr. Speaker, the checks will reflect a March 1st date, 1989. The number of checks that we've sent out this week are a number in 1,100. We have received some 9,000 applications for that mortgage interest shielding program, and we hope to meet our commitments. We are meeting our commitments, and we've sent out something like $100,000 in mortgage interest shielding this week. So appreciate the question and the critic.
Edmonton Centre, followed by Calgary McKnight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Alberta has led the way in human rights legislation, Mr. Speaker, with former Premier Lougheed being the first to bring in the Individual Rights Protection Act. And many Albertans are optimistic now about the appointment of Phil Fraser as the new chairperson of the Alberta Human Rights Commission. However, Mr. Speaker, we are now falling far behind at least 4 of the provinces when it comes to prohibiting discrimination based on sexual orientation. Does the minister responsible for the Human Rights Commission think it is fair for individuals in Alberta to be fired from their jobs or evicted from their apartments solely on the basis of their sexual orientation?
Mr. Speaker, I'm on public record as indicating that I will take forward a proposal to our caucus to include that amendment in the Individual Rights Protection Act. And I will do that. And this House will know what decision that caucus has made when the bill is introduced into the House.
Next year?
Well, Mr. Speaker, given the examples of the denial of public services and ongoing harassment that's faced by gay and lesbian people in Alberta, will the minister at least direct the Human Rights Commission to do a public education campaign to further promote tolerance and understanding for all Albertans in this regard?
Mr. Speaker, there's no question I have had people come to me and share the experiences that they have had. Some of them are very sad. Some of them are, and rightly so, afraid of losing their jobs, afraid of not being promoted, afraid of losing their homes. I think it would be most appropriate for the Human Rights Commission to conduct an awareness program, and certainly the new chair and I have discussed matters of awareness generally and how he might go about doing that. I will be very supportive of the Human Rights Commission in any program where they attempt to raise the level of tolerance and understanding for all Albertans, all Albertans.
Well, getting back to the specifics then, Mr. Speaker, when will the minister and her colleagues, many of whom have publicly and privately endorsed this position, when will she finally take the leadership and enact legislation to prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation in this province? When will she, in fact, table that legislation?
Mr. Speaker, that's a matter for our caucus discussion and is confidential.
Calgary McKnight, followed by Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in October 1988, the delivery of speech-language therapy was shifted from school systems to community health services, removing speech therapists from direct involvement with a multitude of other school-based professionals and creating anxiety for parents who fear reduction in the effectiveness of services. My question is to the Minister of Education. School boards, parents, and boards of health are being dragged into this new approach. Why was there no consultation with these people before the new program was announced?
Mr. Speaker, there was in excess of 5 years of consultation amongst school boards, amongst health units, amongst members of this legislature, and a number of citizens across the province. And we, as a government, Mr. Speaker, made a decision to vest the responsibility for speech therapy services within the Department of Health so that all Albertans, not just school-age children, but preschool children, school-age children and adults would have access to a comprehensive range of speech therapy services.
Thank you. That certainly is not what my information has been. Since schools, and I'm talking about the children who are in schools, stress an interdisciplinary school-based approach to student needs, does the minister truly believe that a medical model provided by an outsider is the most appropriate model?
No, I don't, Mr. Speaker, and that is why my colleague and I, the Minister of Health, and I have ensured and have sought assurances from the boards of health and from boards of education across this province that speech therapy services will be delivered by speech therapists as part of the education team to ensure that the needs of children who are in need of speech therapy services, that those needs are met and continue to be met as well as they have been in the days past, but even better in the days ahead.
Thank you. Because people involved in this are calling it a screw-up and that the whole thing chaos, would the Minister of Education, in consultation with the Minister...
Thank you, Honourable Member. I'm sure with your own extensive background in education, you can find another phrase instead of the one you used and withdraw it.
I withdraw it? Because of the chaos, would the Minister of Education consider a one-year delay so that proper consultation can take place?
Mr. Speaker, my colleague, the Minister of Health, may want to supplement, but it is my belief in speaking with school boards across the province that by and large this transition is happening successfully with the certainty and the assurance of those boards and those boards of health that children's needs will be met, and more importantly, we will begin to expand our delivery of speech therapy to preschool-age children and to adults.
Vegreville, followed by Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has the unfortunate reputation of behaving like Scrooge when it comes to addressing the real needs of Alberta families, and behaving like Santa Claus when it comes to dishing out taxpayers' money to their wealthy and powerful friends.
Right.
In particular, Mr. Peter Pocklington has been promised benefits that exceed $171 million in the form of loans, loan guarantees, and outright grants over the past couple of years. Specifically, Mr. Pocklington was promised a $4.4 million grant and a $12 million loan over 3 years to build a hog processing plant in Picture Butte. And I'd like to ask the Minister of Economic Development what assurances he can give the Assembly that enough construction has proceeded on this facility to justify the money that Mr. Pocklington's received so far.
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to share with the honourable member that no grant money is forthcoming until construction has been started, and no construction has started, so there's no grant money forthcoming.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there was, in respect to the $4 million in the minister's budget last year for that plant loan, and $4 million allocated in this year's budget, I'd like to ask him how much of that money has been given to Mr. Pocklington, apparently in exchange for no construction at all.
Mr. Speaker, I just answered the honourable member as to what grants had been given to Mr. Pocklington. I should indicate to the honourable member that no money has been given to Mr. Pocklington. We have loaned Mr. Pocklington $6 million of the $12 million loan.
$6 million for no construction. In respect,
that's a good deal.
I'd like to ask the minister if there are any specific timelines that require he complete the plant by a specific time before he receives the balance of the $12 million loan and the $4.4 million grant.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to repeat for the benefit of the honourable member, as I did in his initial question, that in the event that construction does not start, none of the grant money is forthcoming. And I'm happy to repeat it again for the honourable member if he wishes me to, because it's exactly as I indicated in my initial question.
Edmonton Meadowlark, Edmonton Meadowlark, followed by Edmonton Millwoods.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, last year the Minister of the Environment acknowledged a long-standing conflict of interest and promised to transfer the responsibility for building dams from his department to the Department of Public Works, Supply and Services. This would presumably provide the Minister with some objectivity in evaluating the environmental implications of dams. To the Minister of the Environment, would the Minister please explain why only 7 members of his department were transferred to Public Works under this initiative?
I would assume, Mr. Speaker, it's because the construction of the dam is purely a public works issue. The environmental issue comes into effect once the dam is built. And that issue involves the headworks and the irrigation systems downstream. So I hardly see the need during the construction stage for a lot of environmental experts. I do see the need for a lot of engineers and construction people, but not environmental experts during the construction stage.
Surely the Minister would want to explain why there aren't more transferred, and doesn't he understand that, in fact, where we need them is before these dams are built? But my second question, Mr. Speaker, is it not the case that 520 employees of his department and almost 40% of his total department's budget are still committed to the planning and operating of water management projects such as dams?
Well, such as dams is a very, very subjective kind of thing. Water management is an altogether different thing that encompasses the subject of dams. Certainly, my department has under its jurisdiction the responsibility for water management. And very simply, Mr. Speaker, the delivery of water to accommodate farming activities and other rural and municipal water use activities has to be delivered in an environmentally safe way. That's why we're involved.
You don't understand, Ralph.
Will the Minister please explain how his department can possibly maintain its environmental objectivity in assessing dam construction and dam projects in this province when it still has this huge commitment to the planning and operating of dams, and in fact has transferred only 7 of 520 employees involved in water resource management projects in this province?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have some people assigned to monitor the construction of the dam, to ameliorate any environmental impacts that might occur, and to make recommendations. Our responsibility is to assess the environmental impact of the project before it's built, so we can determine as a department whether a license to operate and or to construct should be issued in the first place. That's the role and the function of the Department of the Environment. Then after the dam is built, we want to make sure that it's operated in an environmentally responsible way. That is our function, and I think that we fulfill the function very, very well indeed.
Edmonton Millwoods, followed by Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Culture and Multiculturalism, last fall the Alberta Multicultural Commission held hearings around the province asking for the input of Albertans regarding a revitalization of multicultural policy for the province. And yet 6 months have passed and we still haven't got this report. A lot of the ethnocultural communities are wondering if this government is still committed to a multicultural province. So I'd like to ask the Minister this. After a half a year of stalling, how much more foot dragging is there going to be before this report is finally released publicly and we can find out whether or not the government listened to the people of Alberta or not?
Mr. Speaker, we discussed this matter at some length during my department's estimates, and had the member been paying attention that night, he would have heard me say that there has not been foot-dragging, that there has not been stalling, that in fact the process of consultation is going on, that the members of the Commission who work long and hard at their jobs all day long, in fact spend many weekends away from their families working on this report. As we speak, it is being worked on right now, today. And I expect that when the work is completed, I'll have the report, and I'll be more than glad to share the recommendations of the people of Alberta with the member opposite.
Still no date, no commitment. But let me ask the minister this then. Since many of the groups who made submissions to the government's commission during Interchange 88 recommended that the government take some action to introduce programs of employment equity, I want to ask the Minister for Culture and Multiculturalism whether or not he supports programs like that, commitments that have been made by the City of Calgary and other jurisdictions for fairness in the workplace. Will he support those recommendations, or does he not care about fairness?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's 2 or 3 or 4 questions there, and again, they were dealt with in some detail on the evening when we discussed my estimates, but let me just go over it again, and perhaps the member would care to take some notes. We do not have a date yet for the report of the Multicultural Commission because I have not yet received it, but as I said that night, as I said just a couple of moments ago, and I'll be glad to say again, that report will be in my hands very soon, within a matter of weeks. I don't have a date yet. If I had a date, I'd be more than glad to share it. With respect to employment equity, it's the commitment of this minister, the commitment of our department, the commitment of this government to deal fairly, equitably, honestly, and forthrightly with everyone. If you have specific complaints about employment, jobs not being granted in a fair and even-handed manner, I'd love to hear them, as would the chairman of the Human Rights Commission, I'm sure. He's not an elected member of the legislature. Perhaps you haven't noted that.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, given that the report of the Public Service Commissioner was tabled in this House just a few days ago, and it highlighted a number of the government's initiatives to assist women and to assist Albertans with disabilities, but ignored any effort to assist Albertans who are members of visible minority communities, can the minister tell us, will he give us some commitment today to work with the minister responsible for personnel administration to bring in an employment equity program in the public service before the end of this year? Will he make that commitment today?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'll be glad to work with anybody, but I'm not exactly sure what the honourable member from Edmonton Millwoods is talking about when he's talking about employment equity. And there seems to be some question about his knowledge about his own question, but employment equity, I'm not really sure what we're talking about here. If we're talking about a fair and equal opportunity for everyone to have access to any job, then yes. That commitment has been stated. I've stated it. My predecessors have stated it. The Premier has stated it. The government stated it. We're on record. We do it. But if the member opposite has some notion about some sort of an idea that people should be forced to hire certain people because of their race, color, creed, origin, gender, whatever, then I would suggest that it's not going to happen.
We can wait for a supplementary or a future question. Thank you. Chair recognizes Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Economic Development, and it's further along what the Honourable Member for Vegreville have been asking about. I think there's a great deal of concern in the agricultural community, Mr. Speaker, that indeed the government and Mr. Pocklington aren't proceeding forward at the pace that the government had so joyously described would happen last year, Mr. Speaker. The first question to the Minister of Economic Development is, what exactly is the $6 million in loans for that Mr. Pocklington has received in the last 2 budgets?
Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I recognize that both the Liberal and your Democratic Party are not concerned about the creation of jobs or the establishment of further food processing developments within the province of Alberta. Mr. Speaker, we're very concerned with the job creation aspect, and that's why we've been so forceful as it related to the economic downturn over the last number of years in offering support so that our Alberta population would be ensured of having stable employment within this province. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, we want to make sure that our farming population does have access to processing plants whereby their products can be processed and we can involve ourselves in further value adding, which is so crucial to the agricultural community.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, obviously he either doesn't know or won't answer. Okay, Mr. Speaker, as the supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the minister then, has the minister had a meeting with Mr. Pocklington in the last 60 days to ask him what he is going to do about building a new plant?
Mr. Speaker, as other individuals have indicated too, we had the opportunity of having our estimates before the House last week. I understand that the opposition party has designated myself again for Wednesday, and I look forward to having the opportunity in a very detailed way in answering questions that they might deem advisable to be put at that time.
Mr. Speaker, it's not only Mr. Pocklington that handles greased pigs. Mr. Speaker, has the minister had a meeting in the last 60 days with Mr. Pocklington to discuss what he is going to do with the Gainers plant?
Mr. Speaker, let me indicate to the honourable member that he should not be so quick to judge others by his own low standards, and to share with him that we want, and to share with him, as I've indicated earlier, if he is legitimately concerned, I will have the opportunity tomorrow to respond in any way that they wish when my estimates are before the House, when those questions are more appropriately put.
Okay. Question period has expired. Point of order, Leader of the Opposition. With respect to question, Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, under Section 410 of Beauchesne, I was curious why the intervention at the time, because I was asking the minister, just for a point of clarification, if, as has been practiced with many bills, if the minister would table the amendments in the House, Mr. Speaker, and I recognize that she doesn't have to answer, and she chose not to, Mr. Speaker, and we all can take what we want from that. But, Mr. Speaker, it is an important question. I go back to Bill 14, which they withdrew, Bill 22, which they brought in amendments ahead after we'd raised questions, and I was just curious, Mr. Speaker, we think it's an important bill to pursue in that aspect.
The Chair agrees entirely with the Leader of the Opposition. The Chair was just too much interested in having its own 5BX for the day, and I totally agree the question was in order. Thank you. Standing Order 30, Member for West Loch Sturgeon.
Now, Mr. Speaker, I rise under Standing Order 30 to try to point out the emergency and my request that the House debate the question of post-secondary funding of education for the native peoples of Alberta. I base my reasoning on the emergency of the debate, Mr. Speaker, on 4 reasons. First is that the federal government has announced that they were going to cut funding for post-secondary education for a native population across Canada, and they've also announced that they might be reconsidering it. To the fact that they're reconsidering it, the government, the legislature of Manitoba has already moved in, and last week moved that the federal government indeed reconsider it, and that they believe that the native peoples of the West have a legal right to funding a post-secondary education. The second reason for emergency debate, Mr. Speaker, is that the first ministers of the western provinces are gathered together in Edson on the east, called Camrose, to debate issues and to talk about common action. And it would be nice if this legislature, before that meeting convenes tomorrow, we're able to tell that group that they would like the group and to emphasize to the federal government that the federal government take on its responsibility of funding post-secondary education for natives. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, as you know, and I know you were very prominent in the academic communities in the past, the planning for students to go to school this fall is very important on the money that's available. And we have many of our native students now with no idea where they will stand because of the possibility that the federal government will try to weasel out of their responsibilities to finance post-secondary education of native peoples. Those are the main arguments I have for the emergency of the debate now, Mr. Speaker, and I would ask your permission to let the debate go forward.
Deputy Government House Leader, followed by Calgary Mountain View.
Mr. Speaker, I well recognize the feelings of the honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon in moving his motion under Standing Order 30. The point I would question, Mr. Speaker, is the honourable member is asking that the business of this House be suspended, be adjourned, so that we may consider a matter that in the eyes of this honourable member he feels is urgent. Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't question for one moment. It's very important. I don't question for one moment. There are many Native people out there who are wondering what the Government of Canada is doing in terms of its review. But I would point out, Mr. Speaker, the matter before the House today that honourable members have put forward, particularly the member for Calgary Mountain View, under Motion 204, is to deal with what I submit is a much more important issue, and that is to advise the Government of Canada that we oppose in any way the goods and services tax that is a regressive tax that would affect the citizens of this province in a much more severe way, and I think that's more urgent, and therefore I would oppose the honourable motion of the honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the honourable member minister has just stated, the next item of business is a motion standing in my name. I do agree it is a very important issue, and it's my hope that the legislature will get to it before the day's business has elapsed. But, Mr. Speaker, I also believe that the position put forward by the honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon is equally important, and I don't see any reason why we can't also debate both those issues this afternoon. I would imagine that all honourable members would see the importance of the change in the educational policy affecting Native Indian students, and I certainly would have no objection to sort of stepping aside in order to allow the honourable member to put this motion. Thank you.
Deputy Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I concur with the position taken by the honourable member from Lethbridge West in connection with the urgency of this. The proposer of the motion has put it in terms of emergency. The standing orders, I think, have to be looked at, Mr. Speaker, and that's the one that sets out that it's discussed a matter of urgent public importance. No one denies the importance of the subject matter. No one denies that it's a matter of public importance. But I think some meaning has to be given to the word urgent. And when you look at the dictionary, which is really, I guess, the base of interpretation with respect to that, it's a matter of calling for immediate action and pressing. The matter of in the substance of the motion, which of course has merit on its own, is a matter that is not before us, but it's the matter of urgency that is before us. And the whole substance of education for natives is a matter of long-standing debate, long-standing negotiations through treaties, and it's obviously a very important matter, but I think we have to give some credence to the word emergency. And that's the word urgent, and not emergency as indicated by the honourable member.
Thank you. Understanding Order 30, indeed, subsection 1 was complied with. The matter was brought to the attention of the Office of the Speaker with the 2 hours notice, and the Chair thanks the Honourable Member for Westlock Sturgeon for carrying that forward. The matter of urgency is indeed an important issue. And in this regard, the chair has had to take into consideration the fact that the issue as put forward in what would be a proposed form of motion focused in on an area whereby of the funding for Native people with respect to post-secondary education would be the topic. In that regard, with the perusal of the estimates for advanced education have not been completed, could well be recalled to the House for consideration, and that might be one form in which the issue could be dealt with. In addition, other funding areas fall within the jurisdiction of the Department of Municipal Affairs and could be brought forward at that stage as well. The whole matter with regard to urgency and the issue could indeed be raised in any question period by the Honourable Member for West Loch Sturgeon or any others, and could deal with, for example, making strong representation to some ministerial counterpart in the federal government, and that may indeed be one of the areas to proceed with. The proposed motion which was sent to the office by the member for West Loch Sturgeon would in itself be out of order because the way our standing orders are presently worded, under Standing Order 30, no motion would indeed be debatable, but it would be the matter of the issue that would be debated. The Chair also points out under Standing Order 30, subsection 6, an emergency debate does not entail any decision of the Assembly. And that can be a frustration to all honourable members, and is perhaps one of the ongoing frustrations with regard to our standing orders in their present form, and the Chair, along with other members of the House, including the table officers, looks forward to us having a substantial revision of standing orders in the near future. The other difficulty that arises is a matter of jurisdiction with respect to the issue. And in this regard, reference is made back to a decision of this House November the 6th, 1974, with regard to another issue, and the final decision of the Chair was stated in this case, and I quote, "It's very difficult to say that under this rule an emergency which has been caused or contributed to by an action which is outside the jurisdiction of the province should be the subject of this very special kind of debate," close of quote, within this chamber. And therefore, aside from any sensitivity with regard to the issue, the importance of the issue, one which I know is indeed near and dear to the heart of many members of this House, including the member for Calgary Mountain View and the Chair itself, as well as the member for West Loch Sturgeon, under Standing Order 30, subsection 2, the Chair then rules that the request for leave is not in order. Orders